Ladies and gentlemen, robots, chickens, citizens, meat bags, everything in between, welcome to Interlinked.
Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playable Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked.
Today, we have a duo pod with myself, obviously, as well as the greatest co host of all time, the Jiu-Jitsu master, the Western mountain climbing, regenerative, organ meat eating, ground beef, grass fed, maximally awesome co host of all time, Mr. Cryptoetheus. How are you, sir?
Oh, wonderful, because I'm sitting next to, in a virtual standpoint, the absolute push-up master, the pull-up aficionado, the bar bender himself, Ben Gothard. What do you say, Gothard or Gotthard? Because I've been having this internal like fear that I've been missaying your last name this entire time. So we're gonna set it straight on the pod for all who will know from this point on, because our views are in the millions, if not hundreds of trillions. How's the
So,
proper way to pronounce it?
so I think that may be an understatement of our views, but nonetheless, it's Gothard. However, it's obviously spelled got hard. And I obviously have received that question my entire life. So I always like to make the joke first, to the point where back in my official basketball days of the early 20 teens, when I was, playing, the cheerleaders for the basketball team literally they would wear my name on their jersey when they would come to root, and they would do like got hard question mark, like got milk but got hard, and they would wear the number, and like some would draw like a carton of milk or something just to make it really fun. So yeah, and I've gotten Gothard, I've gotten Goche because I'm in Louisiana, so they got some Cajun ass motherfuckers down here, and I've also gotten Goat Herder, which I'm like, look, you're not even trying, but that's fine. We're gonna roll with it. We love goats, they're great.
Oh, I love
But
it. So, Ben Gothard, now I know I've been pronouncing it correctly. So, please, for all further introductions for myself, please include in my epitaph master of sounding out last names. So now that it's been set clear for our quadrillion of viewers across the solar system, this is what you guys come to for the absolute bleeding edge of phonetic name-based alpha. We will be keeping it rolling. Have pronunciation guides for all of the KOLs in the crypto space.
that's right. That's right. You know, I do want to say, I think not only are you a master articulator, but as we have debated different ideas on this pod, you've also become a master debater. And it's really, just an absolute joy to do this pod with you. So,
Oh, make sure that we're only putting that on the R-rated channels that I'm a master debater. I would hate to get canceled. We are not a kid show here at In Their Link. This is an adult program. Yeah.
that's right. So let's jump in. I know everybody's chomping at the bit for the alpha that they have come to know and love from this show. It is, as of the recording of this, late January of 2025. We've seen some ridiculous shit go down in the world. One, Trump got inaugurated and immediately started ripping executive orders. We should talk about that and what that means. Just, help to frame that, I think. Two, some of those have been directed towards crypto. So we should talk about that. And then three, Gary Gensler resigned. People were making a lot of funny jokes about, the Trump and Melania coins, and everybody's like, Gary, come back. We need you. It was pretty funny. I'm sure he got a chuckle and cried at the same time. But so that happened. And then now the SEC is coming in with very favorable um, uh, announcements or policy changes. Technically, they're called like suggestions or guidance, but they've removed, it's called like SAB 21, something roughly like that, which has huge ramifications for the long term of crypto custody within banks. We should talk about that. And then also, we're seeing a lot of movement around using Bitcoin as collateral for lending, which also just totally opens up the floodgate. So those are kind of four things that I think we should tackle first and jump in. Obviously, prices be going like a roller coaster up and down, and people are getting totally freaked out. Everybody's emotions are just being fucked with at a unprecedented level, or maybe unprecedented since the last run. So maybe we should talk about that. But yeah, those are kind of some of the topics I wanted to throw on the table here for us, and I'll just kind of hand it off to you to see where do you want to start? What do you want to dig into first?
Yeah, let's start around like the shifting legal landscape. If you can give a little bit of an overview on, I'm going to botch it, SB, XQRL, Zeta.
Exactly.
So give us a rundown. What is SB number letter?
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually look up I want to look it up directly, and I want to go directly to the SEC government. Um so basically it's called Staff Accounting Bulletin number 121. This was put out effective April 11, 2022. And it basically was saying that different entities, and specifically entities that file reports um, to the SEC and are basically tied up within the U.S. securities world, they have certain requirements when they are safeguarding crypto assets held for their users on their platform. And so they had like these really just, I, I want to say unfavorable, but it's way more diabolical than that. And it may not have been evil. It may have been in the spirit of trying to do good by the people, but for the crypto industry is very negative. And essentially, to boil it down, NFA, do your own research, all that kind of stuff. But to boil it down, it targeted banks and it targeted platforms with huge amounts of customers that would custody assets for other people, right? So the holders of the assets of other people, banks. And it said to them that they had to hold collateral whenever they would custody those assets. So if you give $1 to the bank, then they have a responsibility to safeguard that. And they have certain like regulatory and reserve requirements that they have to hold in order to be in compliance with these sorts of rules. Okay. So what they did was whenever somebody would hold $1 of Bitcoin, ostensibly on the, within the banks, they would hold $1 Bitcoin with the banks. The banks would have to, in their reserves and their obligations and reporting and all the stuff that they had to do to be compliant, it was like significantly more burdensome to them than holding $1 or holding a different type of asset. And so it became economically unfeasible for them to be able to custody and then build products around and support and like help the ecosystem flourish any sort of crypto, and specifically Bitcoin is kind of what it was really targeting. So in essence, it prevented banks from custodying Bitcoin. And as we know, banks are in the business of custodying and building ecosystems around custodying assets. Like you hold your dollars in a bank, they do stuff with that, and that's how they make money. Okay. So it essentially cut off the banks from participating at a core level in Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto ecosystem. The fucked up part is that this came from the staff of the SEC. It's like a bulletin that they put out. So it wasn't even a law. It wasn't a law. It wasn't like this very super official thing. It was like this bulletin that the staff of the SEC put out that was kind of like a, hey, don't do this, and the implied threat is, or we're going to come fuck with you. You don't want to get fucked with by the SEC, especially if you're like a JP Morgan or Bank of America or a Wells Fargo or, one of the big, like the mega banks. You don't want to fuck with the SEC. And you definitely don't want to risk your many, many trillions of dollars of assets that you currently hold. You don't want to risk that for a budding industry, which at the time was a couple of $1 trillion at most. So that's kind of what it was. It put the clamp down on banks fully adopting crypto, essentially. Now that's been repealed. We know GG, Gary Gensler, he's out. They've got a new sheriff in town, and immediately that gets repealed. So that then spurred on the announcement from like Bank of America saying the banking industry is ready to jump in. I think there's some rumors going around about other banks being really excited about it. We've seen previously some banks were willing to kind of risk doing other things around Bitcoin and crypto, even if they couldn't do this one particular thing because it was excessively burdensome. But now that's gone. So this is super bullish. And this is one of those things where it's like, it's probably going to fly under the radar a bit because people just don't really understand it or they haven't looked into it or whatever. But what this means is it is now the banks now have an incentive to custody people's digital assets, to custody their crypto. And that means that they're going to be incentivized to build ecosystems of products around that. So I think this is super bullish for the long term. In the short term, it may be a narrative win. We may be a little bit like exhausted on the narrative wins right now. We may just need price to go up a bit from actual buying, non-selling. But this is something where we ostensibly now we are paving the pathway for bigger entities that move on longer, slower, longer time frames to just accumulate and stockpile digital assets and be able to custody them for their big, big players.
No, I think that's absolutely a good rundown of like the status around that regulation. It is going to be super interesting. I totally agree that it feels like the space is a little punch drunk. There's been so much like bullishness. It's also like very unclear. All of the price targets like seem very throwing like a dart at a dartboard, which they inherently are. But like I'm not seeing like a ton of like analysis of like how much is things like a Bitcoin like strategic reserve, like all the countries catching up, leverage against Bitcoin, like how much is that baked into that $100,000, $106,000 like price target? We're sitting damn near 50% over the all-time highs. The other thing that's like kind of interesting is the overall market. Like we are sitting on top of back-to-back year 20% growth in the S&P 500. So as you're sitting on all of those gains and at these like super, super high metrics in as far as like what the price to earnings ratio is, like the price to value, the market cap valuations, like all of these are super high. And so like, similar to someone who's out at a party for like 2 or 3 days and they're, grabbing whatever their dopamine fix of choice is, by day 3, you need increasingly large amounts of inputs in order to get diminishing returns in that sort of like dopamine track. So it does feel like we are in a short-term vulnerable position. Now, what that means to people is going to vary. Like if you're on hey, I'm okay holding this Bitcoin to like for 10 years, then you have a different sort of like effect of like, okay, well, this is just volatility. I know the asset I'm in. I don't care. But especially if you're trading with leverage, which I never do for this reason, like the crystal ball is a little cloudy right now on how Trump's like sort of like myriad of different changes are going to really affect. I mean, we've got a ton of debt. We've got a debt ceiling coming up. We've got a, ton of money in the TGA that can get spent down. But right now, liquidity is trending down. Strong dollar is not a friend of liquidity. And these tariffs and a lot of things that are bullish for the nation might not necessarily be bullish for the market in the short term. So it does sort of like feel like we need some price action, like bullishness, some momentum in the trend to like really solidify that, because it does feel like things, at least on crypto Twitter, which you certainly can't take to the bank, seem a little shaky.
Well, that's totally right. And anybody can tell this. I mean, we're not looking into some just obscure like crystal ball to tell you this stuff. Like we're making very rational observations of like what we're seeing here. And we're definitely seeing that. I mean, I agree with you completely. Like people are freaking they're narrative drunk. They've stayed up for the third night in a row, and each next vodka tonic is just not hitting like it did previously. Each puff before the pass is just not hitting like it did before, right? And I think also people had very high expectations for what was going to happen. So in my mind, it was like, oh yeah, Trump comes in, writes 50 executive orders. We immediately get $1 trillion market buy into Bitcoin, and then everything goes up. That's kind of what he made it sound like on the campaign tour. And then you have David Sachs, Crypto Czar. I mean, that's just a silly name, to do anyways, but it's like it's just stoking the fires of excitement of the people. And then you come in and you see that first there was the Trump Melania thing that I think threw everybody for a loop. I think a lot of people thought that was bullish because it's like obviously, the president has fully adopted crypto in the most degenerate way and made a ton of money from it. And and it did not exactly go like we thought it would. There were executive orders targeted to crypto, targeted towards a digital asset stockpile. I don't think he said strategic reserve. I think he said stockpile in the order. And it wasn't exactly clear that it was like happening. It was more so, I think, to put together a task force to evaluate. And then you have David Sachs going on the mainstream media saying things like, we haven't committed to it yet because it needs to be studied more. But it's like, dude, you were an early investor in Solana. I think he did it through Multicoin or some other fund, but he was an early investor in a fund that was a heavy investor early in Solana. Like, you're a super early investor in Solana. You have been for years. You understand this stuff. Plus, you're besties with Chamath, who is a very early Bitcoin adopter. Has made a ton of money off of that. Like, you understand this stuff. You know what's going on. You've been thinking about this for a while. What is left to study here? Is it how do we buy it in a way that's not programmed to the market? Like, because I could see you saying like, okay, we want to do a strategic reserve, but we don't want to say at these dates we're going to buy X amount because you're going to get front run by everybody's going to front run the shit out of you. Okay, that makes sound logic, but what's going on here? And also, I think another thing to note is it was just kind of weird how all of it was like a lot of promises and then it just kind of fizzled out. And it just felt like the sentiment shifted a bit. Like once he won and took office, okay, now we're gonna take our stuff. And maybe that's bullish. Maybe it's like we need to think this through much better, and we want to do this right, and so we're willing to take our time a little bit more. And so short term, be damned. We want to take a long term approach. Okay, but maybe say that a little bit more. Also, one of the things I think was super bearish was I think part of one of the executive orders or part of the communications coming out said part of the stockpile would be from seized Bitcoin, not talking about any additional buying of Bitcoin. So
Which they have
I think,
billions of dollars of, so it's a real number.
yes, it's a real number in total government balance sheet level. It's not that big. Like a bill here, there, we're 43 trillion or 40 however many trillion in debt. Like $1 billion is not material to that. So, whatever. But also that means no net new buying, which does not seem bullish. It seems a bit bearish. And then they also mention digital asset stockpile, not Bitcoin stockpile. So maybe there's other things. So
Which is what I want to talk about next for sure.
yeah,
Sorry to cut you off on that thought. But I think like going into it, we were all assuming like, okay, Bitcoin's a store of value. I certainly believe that. It has a fixed supply. The Bitcoin strategic reserve is supposed to be like sort of a hedge against inflation and the depreciating dollar. Now we're like shifting in, and you can kind of see it from the administration's picks as well. As you had mentioned, Zach being an early investor in Solana, like the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which I think does have some merit as an idea of how it could help our like issue with like the like falling dollar, not against a basket of its peers, but in general terms. Now it seems like we're shifting into degenning, which is like not necessarily like this like frugal, hey, this is going to be good for like the overall country. Now, like Trump, at least I think, is showing his hand through what's happening at Truth and Liberty Exchange, which is buying up a bunch of ETH. It's buying up a bunch of, I think, Solana. I want to say XRP was the other one. Like,
Ave too.
Aave, does like having a strategic reserve, no disrespect to these projects, of like ETH, XRP, like Solana, Aave, like make me feel like that's what the government needs to be doing, in the context of like his meme coin. Now, this could all be super bullish for like the altcoin bags, but it does seem like we're starting to get like away from what it felt like the spirit of the promises were on the front end. And honestly, it seems more and more with Trump's actions, it seems like he's a degen and he wants to pump him and his family's bags. Like, is the impression I'm being left with. I think it's hard to not be left with that impression after like Trump, as well as then the Melania like follow on right before the inauguration. Like, this is like worse in some ways, like worse than the insider trading that we've all been, or I'll say myself, has been very frustrated with people, trading and benefiting from policy they're shifting. It's hard to see how this is necessarily different. The one thing I'll say is like Trump wasn't using any sort of like government platforms to pump the meme coin, so to speak. It was before the official POTUS X account, so it was from his personal account going in. But I mean, it seems like from the spirit of the law, we're splitting hairs.
Yeah. To comment on the first point, which is a very good point, is like maybe we lost the plot a little bit. Like Bitcoin strategic reserve seems like a good idea. Seems like Bitcoin store of value, very clear that's replacing gold. I could even give it to you if you were like, we want to expand that because we want to own innovation and technology, and we believe ETH and maybe even Solana are going to be like computing platforms for the digital world. Okay, I could see that. That seems reasonable. But like to extend that beyond any of those at this point seems maybe like irresponsible or just downright fishy. I mean, I can't really I have not articulated a case as to why that would make sense. So, don't because you could say, hey, Ethereum and Solana have become critical technologies to the future of the internet, commerce, and therefore to national security. Like, hey, fine. If you really think that, and we really think that's how that is, fine. So be it. Like, I could see that. But like anything beyond that, and then even that initial argument's like, maybe. Like that's a hard maybe. And I don't know if like the US government aping into those things is a good idea. I don't know. On the second point of launching a meme coin the day that you're being inaugurated to become president, I mean, as much as I am excited about what hopefully will come out of these next 4 years, come on. that's that's a freak. Like, even if you want to say it did not come from an official account, you have the national spotlight on you because you have won the presidency. Like, you are, barring assassination or some other ridiculous long tail event, black swan event, you are about to become president. You have won that. So you're launching a meme coin. I mean, that's like, if it's not way past the line, it's the closest that you could possibly get to being past the line. It's like literally, you can't get any closer. You are asymptotically approaching the line at an infinitesimally small range between you and the line. Like that's the furthest you could get without going over the line if it's not way past the line. So I agree with you there completely on like is on thinking about that. Like, does that cross the line? Does it not cross the line? I've been thinking similar thing. And I don't even know if it matters. Like, whatever. The dude launched a meme coin. He fucking rocked it. He made billions. Hopefully he sends all of our bags flying. This is the new paradigm. Like, this is the market we're in. We got to play it like it is. Who cares? But also, like, maybe we should care. I don't know. I'm not sure if we should or not.
Plus, like, I think it needs to be said. I love this. I got this recently from Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman, something like that, Economy Award winner. Economy Award winner. No, what's that? Nobel Prize winner in economics. I think I combined Nobel Prize and like the Grammys.
We knew what you meant. We knew what you meant.
So if we're sitting in, let's call it June of 2025, and this was the top, and we're doing a diagnosis, it's hard to imagine that people are not going to be kicking themselves, assuming this is how it happened. To be clear, I am not positioned for this to be the top. If this is the top, I'm going to take it on the fucking chin. But I always say, from the last cycle, I'm like, yeah, Logan Paul walking into a boxing match with $1 million Charizard around his neck was about as good of a top signal as there could have possibly been, and that's completely on me for missing it. It's hard to imagine that this was the top. People are not going to be like, yeah, actually, now that I think about it, Trump, the first crypto president, getting into office and launching a meme coin for him and his wife and an exchange months before, and then degen buying potentially the tops in Bitcoin, XRP, and Solana. It's hard to say that the writing wasn't on the wall there. Again, I'm not positioned for that to happen, but I think, and I still am sitting in enough cash that, if things go full nuclear, like I will ramble on and I'll be able to dust myself off and play again. For those who aren't able to do that, like, something to consider.
Now a word from our sponsors.
What's up, crypto gamers? Shout out to our sponsor, Myria. Myria is revolutionizing Ethereum-based gaming with its powerful L2 scaling solution. Think zero gas fees, instant transactions, free NFT minting, and more. Myria offers a suite of tools that are tailor-built for game development, including game-specific SDKs, a spec'd-out marketplace, Web3 spiked leaderboards, new AI super tools, and more. All this fueled by a fleet of player-run nodes that are a breeze to operate and pump out daily rewards for supporting the ecosystem. Plus, check out Meta Rush, the Battle Royale obstacle runner by Myria Studios, dropping very, very soon.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Yeah. I mean, maybe some really long dated, out of the money options as insurance against total thermonuclear destruction of the market. Maybe that's not a terrible idea, because if there was ever going to be a celebrity top signal, how much more of a celebrity do you want? Like, this is you don't get any more celebrity than the president of the United fucking States of America. Like, that is just, yeah. I mean, also, as a quick side tangent, how hilarious is it that we have now renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America? I just find that ridiculously funny.
Rock, flag, and eagle, baby. I mean, it's really showing that, and I'm a firm believer that we are in a completely different world than the one that we grew up in. We caught the sort of last sniffs of unparalleled US dominance, and you're actually now, essentially, Biden was playing last Biden, tail end of Obama. We're playing last cycle's game. I think even Trump's first administration would be guilty of this as well. Like these sorts of thoughts about, okay, expansion, do we like take better advantage of the rare earth minerals in Greenland? Do we need to strongly consider alternate paths if the Straits of Hormuz are going to be continued to get hit by Yemen, or if we do some sort of like hot war with Iran, which is certainly on the table. Like we need alternatives for both resources as well as ways to transport those resources across the globe. So, in a lot of ways, this is just the culmination and the evidence that we're playing a very different geopolitical game, and you need different players for that. And sort of outside of the US, the sweeping sort of L's that the establishment took is showing that the world is like, hey, we need new leaders for this new stage of the game.
And, to be fair, I'm excited about where we are. I think it could be bullish as fuck. I'm just of the opinion that it's worth talking about and considering all perspectives. In what good is a podcast if you can't talk about the fun stuff and throw some crazy ideas out there? I also really, 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 really love the idea of Greenland becoming part of America. That to me is bullish as fuck because of the situations you just mentioned of alternate trade routes becoming less viable. I think maybe the TLDR there of what I've gathered is that as some of the ice melts up in the north of the globe, if you're picturing a globe, as the ice melts up there, new trade routes will pop up if they have not already. That I don't know. And Greenland is kind of perfectly positioned there, obviously with Canada and Alaska, kind of that upper piece to have global shipping access and to be able to transfer things through the various oceans. So it would seem like that is a strategic power play to gain total dominance over that, because other places, as we've seen, can be pretty easily sabotaged and are not like under totally dominant US control. So maybe you have more info on that, but like things like that are just really interesting to think about. Oh, sorry. Let me pause for a second to see if you have anything else to add on that part.
Yeah, just you mentioned that northern sea route, and I think it's an astute observation because where's the other place that we're creating friction right now? It's with our, friends to the north, the Canadians, jokes about becoming the 51st state, some pretty like hot rhetoric coming down. And then from what I had read, or excuse me, listened to, shout out to the President's Daily Brief by Mike Baker, great little like 25-minute a day, get updated on all the geopolitical events. Then he has weekend podcasts where he brings in experts to talk about what is the strategic value of Greenland, or, sort of like a hot button issue with Taiwan and undersea cables. But that northern route with Canada is one that hasn't been used for a while because of arguments about legitimacy in that area between Canada and the US. So in the context of it, you might be actually seeing this rhetoric being a salvo for negotiations to wrestle control away from that and bring that into US dominance. Now, we are not even reliant on the ice melting. So Russia currently has, I want to say it's half a dozen icebreakers, nuclear-enabled icebreakers. So essentially, and this is my area of expertise, but my understanding of it is that these large battering rams that are powered by nuclear reactors cut lead trails through the ice, which then allows military and commercial vessels to like follow those paths. We are woefully behind in this. We have two icebreakers that are old as dust, and both are not nuclear capable because we haven't, I don't want to say because, but probably that came to be because the fact that that northern route was under sort of geopolitical tensions, and that we didn't have to. We had all of these other options that weren't as hot boy. So just wanted to add that little bit of context of why, the president might be being like, okay, saying what on their face seem outlandish comments about, the Gulf of America, Canada is the 51st state, Greenland being taken over, the Straits of Panama being taken over. all this rhetoric, I think underneath of it is driving at, very sensible, logical policy and how we have to be thinking for, the next 50 years.
Yeah, and again, I actually, as an American who has never dealt with the imperial world and is not at all privy to any of the potential sufferings on the other side of the coin, the idea of America growing in landmass, population, control over more places and countries and strategic everything's, I mean, that sounds bullish to me. Like 60 states, let's go. Why would we stop adding? Why would we not become the United States of everything? Like what, first of all, what's stopping us? And second of all, why would we not? And maybe those are the same question that I would pose to you.
The last time that, we went from like a dominated world stage being like when essentially the UK, the old saying, the sun never set on the British Empire, when that started to wane, that's where you really had this imperial stuff bubble up where people were trying to get leg ups on each other, trying to like fight over sort of like colonialization. People were trying to divvy up Africa and the Middle East and parts of Southeast Asia. And we're now heading in that direction where, China's having disputes with India. Obviously, Taiwan's right up there, the Ukrainian conflict. These are the sort of like top tier players on the world stage jockeying to get more influence. You look at, what's happening in the Middle East with Syria recently being, completely taken over and that changing and Russia losing influence. It's a shifting world stage where, the players that most of us grew up in a stagnant time. And that's going to create a lot of friction and that's going to create a lot of pain. But it's also going to create a lot of opportunities. Like, let's say Greenland comes under the US, let's say like as a territory, do they put in tax incentives that people will be moving to Greenland if for one reason or another that's more appealing than Puerto Rico? And maybe there's no business tax, maybe there's no income tax. Like, is the next crypto hotbed going to be split between, Dubai, Singapore, and Greenland? Like, especially with those rare earth minerals and other assets of like, some fossil fuels, like, are we going to be seeing a Bitcoin mining revolution in Greenland where, the cold can be used to keep all of these servers, whether it be crypto or AI or data centers that are just supplying all the social media infrastructure or gaming? Why not take advantage of that cold climate to cool all of these graphics cards?
100%. And I guess maybe the other piece of that is like, is there are we at the end of times, right? I think that's a lot of what people say of like, oh, well, countries are just kind of set at where they are and things are going to remain, borders are going to remain the same. That's consequently that same, or interestingly, that same argument has been put forth by those who probably have not seen war back in, I think, 1905, 1907. So a poorly timed declaration of that, obviously right before two absolute earth-shattering, world wars. So it'll be interesting to see. And fortunately for America, we have the global reserve currency in the dollar, which, albeit, a lot of people like to hate. In America, it's kind of hard to hate that. The fact that we have the reserve currency, I think there are a lot of issues with using fiat currency as we do, and a lot of it ends up in just taxing the people. But everybody else kind of gets shit on more than us. So
Definitely.
It's like the lesser of all evils sort of thing. But with crypto, and especially with the US now seemingly on team crypto, and specifically the proliferation of stable coins, what that's doing, as we've talked about on the pod before, is that is spreading dollars to places where dollars have never been before. Because oftentimes what it takes to really spread dollars to a country is banking infrastructure, and banking infrastructure desires profitable customers who will utilize the banking infrastructure. there are a lot of countries that they're just not worth it for a big bank to go into. But stablecoins will reach all of them, and they are reaching at unprecedented levels. So the fact that crypto has hit the world at this stage, while the US happens to be the number one player in a lot of respects, I think it gives us a unique advantage in, yes, we might have enough tanks and airplanes and robots and whatever to like go and impose our will physically, militarily. We also still financially have a stranglehold, and we absolutely have the world by the balls. I mean, if you tried to get all of the international corporations to stop using the dollar today, they would fail, to my understanding, because all of their accounting infrastructure is based on dollars. All of that software and these systems that have been in place for a long time and continually get upgraded and added, and they're compliant, and they have all this like compliance and legal and accounting and all this stuff, it would prevent them from going off of the dollar standard for a very long time. So we're, at the very least, we're going to have a lingering reserve currency, or a lingering dollar dominance on the world, especially because it's being spread by crypto and stable coins. And especially because now the world, as they adopt stablecoin usage, the world is fueling the acquisition of US debt. So, there's that whole dynamic at play. It just seems like we have a really strong hand, both financially, and now if we adopt crypto digitally, if we continue to plow forward with AI to have a $500 billion Stargate thing, which there's a lot of controversy around, but whatever. NVIDIA being here, Tesla being here, Google being here, Facebook being here, Microsoft, So digitally, we're dominant. Militarily, we still probably are dominant. Who knows? But like, it just seems like we're perfectly positioned to expand if we want to. And I just don't see any reason why we wouldn't. Like, who says there can't be more than 50 states? I don't know if I'm just, spinning my wheels at this point, but yeah, I would like to maybe just get your thoughts on that. And who would be the likely targets? Or like, if you waved a magic wand, who would you go after? We've talked about Canada, we've talked about Greenland. I don't know if you have more comments on there, but like, where else would you expand the US if that's a good idea, if you think that could happen?
Yeah, well, first off, I think the USDC and like stablecoin point is great. Like, one of our biggest exports is the US dollar, and as more and more countries deal with inflation, I tend to think that we haven't seen the end of inflation. I think we're actually on a path that's going to look a lot like the 1970s, where this was the first peak, and then we got it, like, it pretty much came all the way back down. And especially, I don't think Jerome's one to knuckle under to Trump. Trump coming out, I'll drop rates, the rates will drop so fast. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but if that does happen, I think we're going to be in super unrestricted territory. I think you can argue we already are, and inflation's going to come back. Now, what the first stage of inflation showed, and I believe this was standard through the 1970s, is usually because we have the reserve currency. While inflation can get really painful here, we were talking about double-digit inflation, where some countries were struggling with triple-digit inflation. And you're going to grab onto whatever you can. And while physical dollars had to be imported physically, digital dollars do not. They also have the added benefit that the entire market, or the entire backing of those stable coins, is treasuries. So we're in a position currently, and this has been eroding, a lot of the dominance of the US dollar, which reserve currency dominance is usually the last shoe to fall when a nation like sort of falls down in the rankings. So, the pound was the reserve currency long past when there was the military might had sort of sunsetted on the UK, or the English Empire. So that's always sort of like the worry, is this is the last shoe to fall, especially if you're sort of measuring that in Bitcoin. With, if people have digital assets and the Bitcoin keeps going up and up, and your stables marked against Bitcoin keep going down and down, at some point, do people start to jump ship? Then it's really like a last one out, last one out loses. But now the treasuries are an interesting thing. We've got USDC becoming one of the largest owners of treasuries, USDT, because nations partially accelerated, I think greatly accelerated by the way that we treated Russian reserves, which is, hey, we don't like what you did in Ukraine, so we're just going to take all of the money that's in the system. Like if I was China, I'd be like, okay, well, if we go and take Taiwan, are all of our government paper just going to become worthless overnight? So they've started to clamp down on how much they're buying. They still have long runways of when those coupons are going to be running off their balance sheet, but no net new buyers means that's going to be picked up by either things like stable coins or you and me. And humans or regular people are price sensitive buyers. So they're going to need a higher rate of return, especially if they're going to be foregoing a raging stock market, raging real estate market, raging crypto market. We might be looking at 6-7% interest rates on the 10-year. And, are we going to be able to have enough demand to sort of fund the debt? Then the debt sort of like payment from the US government is at a much higher rate. So certainly it's a tumultuous time as far as the reserve currency goes. And this whole new, it's complicated enough when we were just dealing with other nations' currencies and precious metals. Like crypto throws a whole new wrench, and we haven't seen how that really is going to play out.
Well, that's a very interesting point about as demand for treasuries reduces, the return that must be given should, in theory, increase to stimulate additional buying. So the yield, as the demand goes down, the yield should go up, in theory. In
Yeah,
theory,
they're sold
right?
via auction.
Yes. So if you think about it, if all the other countries stop buying, but stablecoin companies continue buying, that means stablecoin companies are going to reap the benefits and the profits, which will make their businesses grow, which will allow them to further spread the dominance of the dollar. You might not need other countries. I mean, we're a long way from that because we're talking on scales of trillions of dollars, and stable coins are hundreds of billions right now, to my knowledge. Maybe in the last 53 minutes, things took a turn for the upswing.
If Bitcoin's still over 100K, we should be okay.
Yeah, but that could literally, I mean, that could be a privately fueled continuation of US dollar dominance for a very long period of time. And I think we're seeing a lot of now new competitors in the stablecoin game, for example, PayPal. And now you have capitalism spreading the use of dollars through stablecoins because it's such a profitable business. So all that I'm getting at is, even if the countries stop buying, the rise of yield should, in theory, power the profits of stablecoin companies, which should, in theory, power their ability to market and spread further US dollar adoption. So there may be like this counterbalance, which could perpetually keep the dollar as the reserve currency. Maybe not forever. I don't think anything's forever. But definitely for a much longer time than could have been previously foreseen.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting point is, and this is sort of tinfoil hat, but we talk about central bank digital currencies in China, and that has a very direct central bank digital currency feel where it's directly controlled by the Chinese government. We could end up in a place, especially because stable coins are so concentrated, and it's certainly on the table for the government to go after USDT. That's been the reoccurring, rain cloud that comes back pretty much every cycle. This is the year that USDT is going to get, somehow shut down by the US government. But imagine that it does, and you have a situation where the entire stablecoin market is controlled by USDC. Do you end up in a situation that, if it quacks like a central bank digital currency and it walks like a central bank digital currency, like, doesn't really matter who's necessarily backing it, but you're going to end up in a situation where this company, Circle, is going to have enormous influence on the US government, and the US government's going to have enormous influence on Circle, because if they default, if Circle stops buying treasuries, that's a ton of leverage on the government. If the government goes, hey, for reason XYZ, the regular tropes supporting terrorism, child exploitation, they bring out that classic horse and are like, hey, you guys have been operating improperly. We're going to seize your treasuries or write them null and void. You could end up in a situation where this does bring something that looks and feels a lot like a central bank digital currency into the stablecoin space. So in some ways, this could be a nefarious backdoor, and I don't know if that's been discussed much, or at least I haven't seen it.
I think you definitely are onto something that people have not taken into consideration. Like, if we think about it just from the ground up, where does Circle derive its profits? They provide stable coins to the market. The market provides dollars to them. They take those dollars and they ladder treasuries, and then they earn the profits from those treasuries, rinse and repeat. That means literally every single penny that they have ever made, ever, has come as a result of treasuries. That means they are entirely dependent on the US government for 100% of their revenue. I'm sure they have other sources of revenue that I don't understand and blah, 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 blah. But that is their business model. So already today, the US government has got a chokehold on them. 100%. Like, if the government wanted, they could fuck Circle into oblivion. That's without a doubt. So that's a very real possibility. Also, you have folks like BlackRock and I'm sure other large financial institutions that have an equity ownership stake in Circle. That means they're in bed with the largest U.S. financial institutions on planet Earth. That means the government is also, they have leverage on them from that angle. Now, USDC has a really special place in the eyes of the U.S. dollar, so that's leverage too. But I really think the greater leverage is on the side of the government, because the government can exist without Circle. I don't think Circle can exist without the government.
And I'm going to coin a new term. You heard it here first on Interlinked, the stablecoin industrial complex.
Let's go.
And I think it's definitely like a vulnerability. We've seen this play act out in the banking industry, where obviously due to regulatory concerns, the government can just shut down banks essentially or not bail them out. As we saw with that wave of like Choke Point 2.0 and all the people that have been debanked, whether it's the cannabis industry or the cryptocurrency industry. So certainly think we might actually get this sneaky sort of backdoor into crypto. And in some ways, the strategic reserve of Bitcoin and crypto assets does that too. If the government becomes the number one holder of Aave, and for one reason or another, they want to fucking nuke Aave, they're going to be in the best possible position to do that. So in some ways, this is a new class of whale coming into the crypto market. And as many people know, whales do not always have the masses' best intention at heart. The goal is to dump on retail with the most amount of tokens possible and to be able to exert their leverage across like the crypto space. So, and then we usually end on a positive note. This one will be more on what could be the doom and gloom. How do we end up enslaved by stablecoins?
What we thought was our savior is actually our reckoning. Well, the one thing I will say is, and then let's wrap it on up here, but regardless of all the interesting things that we talked about today that might have been perceived as bearish, we still had the president of the United States launch a meme coin on Solana. That means he's aware of it, and that means he's benefiting from it. And the one thing we can always count on is that people will act in their own best interest. We also have now way more friendly SEC guidance towards crypto. We also have David Sachs, a known degen, a known friend of Chamath, who's a known Bitcoiner and degen. And that whole, let's call it all-in industrial complex that's now part of it. By the way, I love stablecoin industrial complex. It's sick in all aspects. SIC. But all of these things I think point to, at the very least, we have a lot of attention on crypto. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think anybody does. But if there was ever a time for maximum attention being drawn to the crypto markets, it would probably be now. We have countries buying, we have companies buying, we have pension funds buying, we have legislation geared at acquiring. The president's DeFi thing, World Liberty or whatever it is, they're acquiring Bitcoin, they're acquiring and staking ETH plus all the other stuff. So what a time to be alive. How fucking cool it is that we get to live in this world. There are definitely ways to make it, regardless of what direction markets go or what happens. And I want to pull up a chart for next time, but if you plot total GDP adjusted for inflation of the world from 1800, it starts here and it's right about here. Usually, if things go from here to here, the next move is parabola. So I think with robotics, crypto, AI, blockchain, gaming, all the shit together, I think we're about to hit humanity's parabolic innovation age. And given what AI is about to enable us to do, the past 1,000 years of progress that humanity has made, we should now be able to duplicate that rate of change within the next 5 to 10 years if things continue as they are, going. So we're on the golden age. We're on the precipice of a golden age of humanity. And what a fucking time to be alive. So there is a lot of bullishness still here. And it's still fun to talk about all the things and to opine. So anyways, Sir Cryptoetheus, the greatest co-host of all time. As always, it's a pleasure, sir. And to those watching and listening, we will see you on the next episode.